Hello and welcome to Nature Knowledge. This is a speaker series with experts sharing scientific knowledge on current issues affecting nature in Florida. I'm your host, Dr. Shelly Johnson, State Specialized Agent in Natural Resources with University of Florida IFAS Extension. Thanks for joining us today.
Good nod. Thank you. And I'll continue. So it's the burning question that I've been asked over the last 4 years. What's going on with hemp and how are we going to make it an industry in Florida? My lab is going to be excited to see the pun here carrying on, but is it hempening or not? And a piece that's really exciting for me to share today for this natural resource focused seminar. This is to sort of talk a little bit about the agroecology that I do as well. To do that, I'd first like to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got here and how I'm working through this hemp question. So how did I get to be an agroecologist? This is some pictures of me along the way. Back in undergrad, when I got excited about ecology and plants, it was through a project adding invasion and in ecology, invasive plants into the forests of Michigan. So there was a shrub that was starting to get in, and we were wondering how well it would do. You see me here tossing a saw up into the canopy of Michigan's big trees and gathering a bunch of leaves. And we did that the same for the invasive species as well, and compared those leaf traits, all within the big picture of natural resources, which is what I went to Michigan to do for my master's degree. Then I went out to Utah. I really wanted to make a difference in the world. And at the time, sustainability initiatives were moving towards energy and agriculture. And I wasn't an engineer at the time. I was a plant guy, and so I moved into agriculture. Thought I'd be a pruning expert for temperate tree fruit canopies at one time, apples and cherries. I was also doing some poultry farming on the side. So that's when I really tried to walk the walk of agroecology. At the same time, I was learning how to talk. And then something about all that I did with plants in the north convinced the University of Florida that I can do it down here in the tropics of Florida. And so that's when I really laid in on my agroecology as a position here at UF, primarily focusing on plant diversity and the management of plants in agroecosystems. And so the question that I get a lot is, well, gee whiz, what is agroecology? And perhaps everybody does a little bit of explaining for what their research is and a bit about their discipline. As a newer discipline, as one that means something different, depending on where in the world you are and who you talk to, I definitely see the importance of really defining what I am as an agroecologist, and so that plant ecology, that crop physiology, and biodiversity is the areas that I take to. If you're interested in the resources that I've been developing about agroecology, instead of spending a whole bunch of time doing that, I wanted to drop this link here for anybody that was interested in. But as sort of the simplest answer that I've come up with over the last couple of years, what is agroecology? It's productive, biodiverse, and resilient agricultural systems. And by adding in those facets of biology and ecology into your management of agricultural systems, we sort of move towards the goals of agroecology. And a critical part of that is thinking about farms as agroecosystems. So, of course, they're not a full match with natural areas, but what we can learn from the way that nature works and incorporate that into the way that farming works. Of course, with that critical distinction between productivity as managed by us in farms. And so this is just a conceptual diagram that I work through a lot, trying to get folks to understand and tell me more about their agroecosystems. And of course, that piece of scale, moving from the plants in crops and in competition or in groupings is sort of my wheelhouse. And then I try to work with as many folks across the ecosystem and food system level. So right at the very beginning, when I got into Florida, I was working to figure out how it is that I get involved with existing research and partner with folks across agronomy department, across the Tropical Research and Education Center, and more broadly in the university through a series of hand waving and finger pointing. They got this young and hungry assistant professor to agree to take a lead role in the industrial hemp program. And so the philosophy and the research approach that I bring as an agroecologist is something that I have attempted to apply to hemp as well, thinking about the environmental impacts, thinking about the ecology and the community development that's necessary in addition to the agronomy in order to do this. So with that kind of big picture scope in mind, with the opportunity to evaluate a new plant for introduction into Florida, the design of a new cropping system, and how that will interact with our natural resources and natural areas in the state, brings me to hemp agroecology. And perhaps more importantly, to acknowledge that I can't do hemp agroecology by myself. And so the University of Florida hemp program is many, many people, a dozen departments, 30 or more associated faculty, graduate students, extension professionals. And so this is just the folks on the team that I can find pictures for to put on this slide. But just to acknowledge that what I'm talking about today and the work that I'm doing in hemp and agroecology is really a team effort. So my hat's off to these folks and lots of thanks to the camaraderie and the support over the last several years. Okay, so I had a chance to talk about agroecology. I took a couple extra minutes. Hopefully some of that resonates with you folks, and if you're interested in agroecology more broadly, please reach out. There's plenty of other things that I'm doing. Usually folks say, hey, it's the hemp guy, and I try to say I do agroecology too, and so it's been fun putting this presentation together to do a little bit of both. So the burning question, is it hempening or not? And I can't promise you that I'm going to answer the question directly today. In fact, right at the very end of the presentation, I'm going to try and ask you folks to help me answer that question. But I can certainly walk through the logic and the experience that I've had over the last several years. So what needs to happen first? This is kind of a list of things that we've been exploring through our research and extension, pieces of the puzzle that need to be put together in order to establish a hemp industry in Florida, in the United States, more broadly. And so it really starts off with those genetics, finding genetics that are a match to our subtropical and tropical environments. A lower latitude, that southern latitude, is a very important part of hemp physiology and crop production. So the light as it lasts throughout the day, to say it in a different way, cannabis sativa, which is hemp at less than 0.3% THC, also responds to those day lengths. So the genetics and the access to the seed and plant material is a critical part. The cultivation knowledge, really where my interests and focus start through the agronomy side. That is timing of planting, the resources that go involved, whether it's water, fertilizer, the incidence of pests and diseases, and a special consideration for hemp is the potential to exceed the legal THC limits. As a special aspect of this new crop introduction, any really crop introduction into Florida, it goes through an assessment for invasion risk into Florida's natural areas, and hemp scores, cannabis sativa scores at a high invasion risk. It gets like a 12 in the questionnaire, the assessment, where anything better than 6 or so is listed at high invasion risk. And so this is something, an ecological challenge that really needs to be addressed as part of any hemp industry in Florida. So as you move that cultivation knowledge into practice, you're keeping your crop contained. You have to have those viable yields. And that's another piece of the puzzle that we have seen at small research scales and in some farms. But as I mentioned, with the discrepancy between the permitted acreage and the acreage approved for harvest, something's happening in between getting your permit and going to harvest your crop. Now, hemp, you don't sell in the grocery store as a raw material. Most of the hemp products need to go through a processing step. And so working with that part of the industry is a critical aspect of this as well. Last piece here, of course, is the economic potential, both from the farming side and the processing side, along with those potential markets. And so a lot of things have to happen. Now, this is true for any new crop that comes into any new area. This has been my experience specifically in the instance of hemp. So let me just back up for one more second and make sure we're on the same page about this plant. Now, this plant is probably the most recognizable plant on the planet. But it still takes this level of detail in order to understand what this plant is as a crop. So cannabis sativa, as described by Linnaeus, is hemp. It's also marijuana. And so what we get in the distinction between hemp and marijuana is a legal distinction, which is the delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, that THC less than 0.3% per dry weight is that critical piece about the distinction between hemp and marijuana. Now, because of that distinction, there's probably going to be a regulatory framework around hemp, at least for the foreseeable future. Whether or not it's economically viable is a big part of the work that we're doing, and then, of course, also the environmental and the ecological impacts that we're monitoring as well. So, cultivation across the country takes permits, whether that is from the USDA for states without their own state program, and then the permits for states with hemp programs like Florida come through those states' Department of Agriculture. So everybody needs a permit to grow hemp, and that's a likely aspect that'll be maintained for a while. So now another important piece to consider about hemp as a plant and how that is different across the potential crops is that, again, same plant, hemp, marijuana, cannabis sativa, but hemp can be distinguished as several different cropping systems based on what it is that you're trying to grow the plant for. And of course, the genetics and the breeding and the plant selection that's come along with each of these different product goals is distinguishable as well. So the fiber, you're growing it primarily for stem material. You want to keep it vegetative and then harvest just before flowering. in order to get that highest fiber quality. There's two types of fiber as well, the external fiber and the bast, and the internal fiber and the hurd. Those are going to be separate markets as well for the fiber. The seed production, some folks call it grain, though it's an achene. Interesting note about cannabis as well is that it's dioecious. So you see here in this middle picture that there's a male plant here on the left side and a female plant on the right side. So you need both of those in the field, and you need to produce flowers, and you need that pollen to pass over in order to get that seed load. The last cropping system, which is unique as far as the cropping system and management practices. This is hemp for flower. The unpollinated flowers are where the cannabinoid, terpene and flavonoid are being extracted. The one that's most commonly familiar to folks, what you see in the grocery stores and the gas stations, is cannabidiol or CBD. And so THC and CBD are both cannabinoids that are produced by a similar synthetic pathway. And so you know, those resins, those trichomes in the flower development and the nearby leaves is where you're going to get those high concentrations of cannabinoids. Now, let me take one more sort of diversion to point out very clearly that I just told you one of these cropping systems for flower are unpollinated female flowers, whereas the grain is specifically male and female plants in the field. And so really poses an interesting question for the industry, how we'd be separating that pollen in those cropping systems. Thanks to Heather Griffin from the IFAS Communications for putting all these nice graphics together, but just sort of a graphical representation of how the morphology of these plants are slightly different. Fiber, tall and slender, just before flowering. The grain is the males and the females, and the cannabinoid is sort of a more stocky, bushy plant to really maximize those flowers. And so the cropping systems look really different as well. So the fiber is going to be sort of on the flat, direct seeded at 1 million plants per acre or more. And that takes the 90 to 100 days to get to flowering. The grain, we've done it on mounds, but I've also seen it done on the flat. Those counts are 100,000 to 250,000 plants for the acre. Takes a bit longer for that crop to go to full maturity. Of course, the pollination is necessary. And the cannabinoids, these are done more horticulturally, like the vegetables and the strawberries and other high maintenance crops like that. So the 6-foot center raised beds, these are transplanted, 2,500 to 10,000 plants per acre, so many fewer plants in the field, and they can mature a little bit earlier based on the genetics, but they can also take just as long. So really important to sort of keep these different crops in your mind. Takes different management, takes different harvest, and certainly different markets to deploy. Okay, so Dr. Johnson, we had talked about flipping a question on the poll right around now, and so I thought I would take a breath and a drink for my water if you're able to ask that question of the group.
Yes, you want the legal status one or the opinion?
The permits one. There you go.
Great. So I'll give everyone a minute to answer that.
Hey, we're getting pretty good response. All right, thank you, everybody. We're going to get to 100%. That we just crossed by 75%. Cool. So does everybody, I get to see the results as they're coming in. Does everybody get to see them, or I'll have to,
No, I need to
I'll have
end,
to
end
dictate?
the poll. You're at
Oh, okay.
80%. We seem to be stagnating. I'm gonna go ahead and, oh,
That's good. Yeah,
now we're
let's
at
do it.
81. I'm gonna go ahead and end it. This is your last chance, everyone. Okay, so it says I'm sharing the results.
I see results. I'll talk about them anyways. So this is one of those questions that I ask everybody that I give a presentation to, because in sort of the scheme of things, it's a very simple question, like, what's the legal status of hemp? And yet it is relatively complicated, enough complicated that I get a spattering of answers. So the majority has it. Growing and processing hemp is legal with a permit for organizations or farmers in all states. So that was a result of the 2018 Farm Bill that distinguished hemp as an agricultural commodity. But as far as that law defined the industry, it also required that there be regulation as optional at the state level. If there is a state that has chosen not to have a state program, then the USDA and the federal program steps in. So please, if you have any intent to grow hemp in the state of Florida, go get a permit first, and that's the transition into my next part of the talk. So I can X out this poll. Then I think everybody's had a chance to see it. And if there's any follow-up questions about this poll question, be happy to answer them at the end of the talk. Okay, so I exited that out. And then jumping into barriers to cultivation. So I mentioned sort of what's it going to take to hempen, and this is just a few more minutes on each of those pieces. So in Florida, in order to possess and cultivate hemp, cannabis sativa less than 0.3% THC, you got to have a permit. And if you're interested, please, the FDAC's hemp website is very thorough. There's a lot of information there. And if you did navigate over to their online application, this is what you'd see. What do you need in order to do that? These sort of two things are the critical pieces. So prior to applying for a cultivation permit, you need to submit fingerprints to a local law enforcement office so they can clear you from having a drug-related felony over the last 10 years. If you pass that background check, then you get to complete an application. A critical piece of that application, as indicated by this plant behind the fence, is the environmental containment plan, which is the way that the state of Florida has handled the risk of escape from cultivation and invasion into natural areas. So there's a couple of pieces that you'll also have to do: collect information about your field and your farm and your intent to cultivate. That's sort of it's free aside from the cost to get your fingerprints done. And really, there's 30,000 acres of permitted hemp. It's easy enough for folks to get to if they're interested. Now, the genetics are a much harder barrier to get past for a couple different reasons. Access to genetics is a struggle. Just finding seeds that folks are willing to buy from you, sell to you, finding transplants or other sort of plant material, depending on your cropping system. Particularly with the language for certification with a capital C, that's a special national level certification for the quality of seeds. Now, that's something separate from this other piece of quality that I wanted to bring up, which on the left, you see a bunch of different varieties here with a bunch of different seed sizes, and varieties can vary in seed size as well. So tooling your equipment and being able to get a consistent batch of seeds, quality seeds, is something that I've struggled with on occasion. The other piece here, this picture in the center, this is a picture of a single seed lot. So these are all the different types of plants that came out of a single seed lot that was sent to the program in the early days. And then on the right-hand side, so you get good seeds. They are consistent and high quality, but then they're not a match for Florida. So what you can see here on the right-hand side, there's some plants in the background that are nice and green and tall. Those are genetics from southern latitudes that grow or have grown well down here in South Florida. And then in the front are genetics from Europe. And so those northern genetics, when they come down south, they flower soon, both because of the light environment and something I'm beginning to consider much more as well, the stress from the environment. So genetics, barrier to cultivation. Best management practices. So if you're in a basin management action plan and you've got to enroll in best management practices, well, it turns out that for hemp, the manual doesn't exist yet. And so my research team is out there trying to do that research on fertility management and irrigation, trying to put that research together to support what best management practices look like. In the meantime, they've got sort of general language for folks to commit to, that record keeping, and just trying to be thoughtful. Now, there's this interesting thing about hemp. Folks declare it's good for the environment. It doesn't need a lot. Well, in the greenhouse, this research here depicted on the left-hand side, we can see that very little fertilizer is required when the plant is able to take it up. That 50 parts per million to 150 parts per million, plants are still looking healthy. Much beyond that, you start getting salt intolerance and stress from the change in pH and other aspects of over-fertilization. And now we do this in the field in our calcareous limestone bedrock, and it takes us up to 200 pounds of nitrogen applied as urea per the acre. And so it's a really mixed story here. I get the sense that hemp is really going to take some intensive management, both from fertility and irrigation. And so that's going to have an impact on the environment. It's also going to be a barrier to cultivation, as farmers don't have a solid guideline to operate from. We're kind of all learning how to do this together. The pests and diseases, there's an abundance of things that like to live in Florida. And that pose challenges for hemp. Just to work through from left to right, the early seed establishment and trouble with the damping off and the wilting. Here, the next picture is just the trouble we've had with weeds, getting the plants established. This one here, center right, is southern blight. Another common problem in other crops that has found its way over to hemp. And the environmental disaster here on the right-hand side, this is what happens to a well-established hemp crop after flooding rains over the course of 24 hours. So just a lot of things that are happening, a lot of things to be mindful of, another barrier to cultivation. The last one I'll mention is this idea of harvest timing and testing. And so all hemp crops must be tested prior to harvest. So this is that approved for harvest that we mentioned right at the beginning. And so within 30 days of harvest, a farmer has to contract with a testing lab that'll send out a technician to take a sample of the plant, to bring it back to their lab to give a report to the farmer and the Department of Agriculture. And now several interesting things about THC development in the plant as it relates to trying to be below that 0.3%. So it turns out, again, that I mentioned where the flowers are is where there's the most THC at the end of these stems, particularly on the main stem of the top of the plant. And so if you sample just the top, as is the current guidelines in Florida, you're going to get a higher THC result than if you, let's say, took the whole plant and ground it all together and took a sample. There's a lot of details in the regulatory framework that are interesting and how that all played out, but particularly, taking that test and making sure that those plants aren't above that 0.3% THC threshold, 0.35% if you allow for sampling error. And so this last graphic here on the right-hand side is a development of cannabinoids in some flower production over the course of an experiment. And so after 4 weeks of flowering, we already saw these genetics that we tested exceeding that 0.3%. So you have to, quote unquote, harvest at the right time. And that's another challenge for farmers who are looking to, protect their crop and protect their business. Okay, so that's sort of the agronomics and the challenges there. I also like to take a couple minutes to talk about the environmental impacts. And so I mentioned sort of as a hint earlier on that that hemp is a nitrogen hungry crop. It's also a water hungry crop, even though there very easily can be too much water. But we start putting 200 pounds per acre of nitrogen on these hemp fields, and that really adds up to a pretty intensive management system, a lot of opportunity for leaching and impacts on water quality if those nutrients aren't managed well. And on the right side, I just wanted to point out that many of the flower crops are also happening in plasticulture. So you get all that plastic, you get all that drip tape. Some folks are putting on lighting in order to keep their crops vegetatively. And so there's infrastructure there. It takes a lot of people to do the harvest, to be knowledgeable of a new crop, to get those markets and marketing set up. And all of that takes investment as well. So something to consider. And I mentioned a couple times the issue with this escape from cultivation. As an invasion plant ecologist, I'm sort of really excited to be threading this needle between a crop that has potential in the state of Florida to develop a new industry, at the same time trying to protect our natural areas. And so what happens if a crop flowers too soon, like this picture over here on the left, and a farmer's just like, well, no big deal, I'm going to get out of here, and they abandon the field. Well, we have evidence that for at least 2 years after an abandoned field, there are still plants that are emerging, volunteer plants from that field. The populations decline, and it's sort of within a potentially a manageable range if someone's paying attention. Particularly because this plant is so easily recognizable. However, the volunteer, the risk is not zero, and something really important to continue to consider as the industry scales up. So I just wanted to put again one of these agroecosystem diagrams up with the hemp here in the middle this time. So hemp's interacting with a whole bunch of other crops across the state. And so the types of research that I'm interested in, cover crop management, plant diversity, really just getting started here in hemp agronomics and hemp production. And so I'm really excited to add these layers of impacts, both environmentally and ecologically across the state, across the industry. And this is, again, articulates sort of my role in this hemp space as hemp agroecologist. And it's been a lot of interesting considerations, and I hope to continue the dialogue. So that's a lot of heartache, some doom and gloom, some cautious optimism here. I've had this conversation now with folks over the last 4 years. folks giving me calls, folks coming to my office, folks coming to events saying, well, how's this going to happen? How am I going to make money growing hemp in Florida? And from the very beginning, we at the University of Florida took the perspective and the approach to speak from the facts, speak from the knowledge. I said, I don't know way too much in the beginning, and I'm still saying no, a little bit less, but still too much today. There's a lot still to be seen. The hope for hemp is the story that I'm trying to introduce today and figure out sort of what directions our program at the University of Florida can go, and I'm happy to get some help. So the hope, right, is that hemp does grow in Florida, and we have evidence of that. Primarily in the central and northern latitudes of the state. You can get it done here in South Florida. Here's a picture here of a 15.5-foot tall hemp plant from our 2019 grow. That's my proud postdoc who set up that project. And of course, we've talked about the flower production as well, indoor production, and we can do it with the biodiversity. So there is some hope. But putting all the pieces together, I mentioned what it's going to take to happen to HEMPen. All of those pieces have to line up together, and it's been the exception in order to see that. Small farmers, small acreage, and controlled environments are primarily where it's happening now, and the push for the industry now that the cannabinoids are in a market decline is to try the hemp for the fiber and grain. And I'm still waiting to see someone who harvests a crop and gets a good sale out of it. Regardless, despite all these challenges, hemp has strong public and farmer support. So from a public survey, the legalized growing and processing of hemp in Florida is something folks are generally favorable to. Folks that have had a chance to work with the UF hemp program have had a positive experience, even when the crop didn't turn out very positive. And certainly the interaction with the seed and the genetics, being able to learn together has been a great opportunity. So sort of where do we go with a hemp public and private partnership? Here we are, the University of Hemp and all of these other partners. Again, I mentioned at the beginning, it wasn't just me, but it was a whole bunch of folks from across the University of Florida, a whole bunch of folks from across the government agencies. And so a special thanks to the Department of Agriculture, who put together the permits, the permitting structure, the testing and the testing structure, really worked closely with us at the University of Florida to try to do that with thoughtful information and approach. And those folks are out there to help with the permitting, to help keep folks in compliance. And I've heard a lot from folks that have enrolled in Florida Hemp. Those growers really given it a shot, that they have received good support from FDEX. There are emerging hemp markets. For what it's worth, folks can see that there's options to buy hemp across the country now. Most of these products are imported at this time, but there could be an option for the United States to get involved, given the market potential and the processing facilities. So here I am landing on the takeaway for today, the agroecologist dilemma. After 3.5 years, 4 years of taking a very fact-based and sort of conscious approach to communicating about hemp, really thinking deeply about what I say and how people perceive that. There's sort of two paths, and in some ways I've grown a little bit impatient about the two competing paths, and I'm ready to try to decide what happens for hemp in Florida in the long term. So I mentioned the current status, where there's a whole bunch of opportunity to grow hemp, but there's also a whole bunch of challenges to grow hemp. And the way it's happened so far is that it's on the grower. on the grower to put all the pieces together, to get the permit, to find the genetics, to grow the crop, to find a processor to sell it to. This is really competitive and grower motivated. There is folks that are doing it at small scale and doing it successfully, but it hasn't really mounted to a large processing industry here in the state. And so there's sort of limited processing and limited research support in order to address those folks that are giving it a go. Also, it really tends to be risk averse in terms of cultivation and conservation, right? You have to submit your environmental containment plan, but it's kind of a brief thought at the beginning and then an afterthought if it was to become a problem. So this current status, my limited research capacity at the University of Florida and the engagement we've had with these innovative communities in hemp is sort of that first pathway. And, given my caution, this is sort of what I describe as hemp free Florida. So this is where it's small acreage, it's indoors. Maybe if folks can find a buyer, but otherwise, by and large, not much of an industry in the state going forward. Now, this is in contrast, perhaps, to the big picture, like, hey, this has got to grow at scale in order to get a big processing industry, in order to get investment here in the state of Florida across large scales. And so this is the sort of cooperative processor supported scaling that I'd like to see. Sort of finding those industries that are willing to invest at the same time that farmers are willing to scale up so that we can meet in the middle, as opposed to playing this game of tug or chicken and the egg. It's kind of time. If we're going to invest, the industry's got to decide to do that. At the same time, and with a sort of appropriate scale, the sponsored research can be sort of coordinated with that scale. That's sort of one of the ways that the University of Florida hemp program is poised to go forward and take it to the next level. In order to do that, though, there really has to be some upfront risk mitigation, right? If I mentioned the invasion risk, if we were to scale up 10,000, 20,000 acres of seeds, that's a bit of a different risk than the small acreage that we have currently in the state. So that's got to be right up front, that conservation forward, the opportunity to link up conservation in nearby areas with hemp cultivation, the opportunity to design hemp crops and cropping systems that are zero waste and carbon neutral, all sorts of things that I'd be interested to do as agroecologist, is really going to take a commitment from a large group of people to make happen. So this is what I call the free hemp Florida. And that's really just sort of given hemp the freedom to operate, given hemp business the freedom to operate, and sort of hemp the opportunity to move around the state at free will. So this is kind of the two paths that I can see the state going, kind of a smaller muted approach based on farmers versus the big industry-driven, community-driven approach. Hemp-free Florida next to free hemp Florida. Now, that's interesting, these animations. The thing that I want to say more specifically is that it's not actually free, right? A lot of this costs in some way. And so although I use the term free, really it's meant sort of as an analogy, and being mindful of sort of what it's going to cost in order to scale up hemp in this way. So which do you see? Hemp-free Florida or free hemp Florida? So I gave ourselves just 10 minutes of time for questions. So while I start answering questions, I'm very curious to hear about what the group has to say about where to go. I wish my animations were a little bit more organized so that I can do it cleanly. But again, this is my first attempt to sort of make this pitch, and I'm curious to hear from the group. So thank you, everybody. While those polls are coming in, I'll also advance to anybody who's interested in our resources. Please reach out, check out our website with that information, or reach out to me, and I'd be happy to take some time to answer any questions. Okay, I made it. So, Dr. Johnson, what kind of interesting questions do we have?
Thank you. That was excellent. The poll is slowing down, so I'm going to go ahead and end this, and then I'll
That's
share
fine.
if people want to see. It looks like we've got 69% at Free Hemp Florida and 31% at Hemp Free Florida.
Yeah, break it up into a couple of thirds there. That's it, right? It's not settled. It's not settled. So thank you very much, folks. That's helpful feedback. All right.
And yeah, we definitely have some questions in the chat. So I'm just going to kind of go back. We've got about 8 minutes. So I'm just going to go back kind of in order that they were presented. I'm going to kind of combine these two. So Jennifer asked if there are any laws for the use of hemp in the state of Florida. And I guess kind of combined with that, Anne was asking about, she'd heard that you can use hemp for toilet paper, and was asking about, would that be a higher value than other fiber uses? So maybe just in general, like what are the kind of fiber uses and laws in Florida regarding that?
Yeah, sure. So there's permits that I mentioned for the cultivation. There are also permits for what they call food and processors. And so if you are taking a hemp product and processing it, then you're handling it, and so you require that additional permit there. That's not a free permit. That's a $650 permit. And because of this permitting framework, a very important point about hemp sales and hemp industry in Florida is that there is no cottage industry allowance for hemp. So got to do it commercially and have to have a cultivation or processing permit in order to do that. Now, toilet paper, that's a new one for me. And it's interesting because hemp is a coarse fiber. So when you get like a hemp shirt or a hemp hat or something that's 100% hemp fibers, it's kind of scratchy. So I don't know that I would recommend it for toilet paper, but maybe they're using those internal fibers and using it more like a binding agent. Anyways, Popular Mechanics back in 1938 came up with that number, that 24,000 uses for hemp. I'm more of like a lumper than I am a splitter. So for me, it's like 8 uses, 10 uses. And those fibers, they can be inserted into many textiles, into many products, but they have to work in that processing facility. So for instance, if it's a shirt and it uses cotton fibers, those hemp fibers have to match the cotton fibers in order for that shirt sort of textile to match. So I'm rambling a little bit. But there's a whole bunch of extra layers to how do we use the fiber and how do we get it into our industries.
All right, thank you. Okay, I'm going to combine a couple other questions into one bigger question. So Susan and Ava asked basically about, what is the native range of the plant? So where is it native rather than invasive? And kind of along with that, Donna asked, in the states that have been growing it for a long time, like California and Colorado, have they experienced any invasiveness there?
Yeah, that's a whole separate aspect of a presentation. Great questions. So native range for hemp is really challenging to determine because of how early it co-evolves or cohabitates with human settlement. So our best guess is Central Asia. And then it spread globally as a camp follower. And all of those hybrids, as they moved around, really mixed up the genetics. So it's kind of hard to say exactly where the native range remains. USDA put together a map for the United States back in the 1970s, and it's the majority of the country sort of emanating out of the Midwest. Down to maybe South Carolina, going east, and just up to the deserts in the west. doesn't include Florida, to be explicit about that. And also historical cultivation back in the 1800s, early 1900s was primarily in the Midwest. And that's where we see cannabis listed as a noxious weed or a plant pest. And so those Midwestern states is where that cultivation was occurring, and it hasn't quite left. We know cannabis was introduced into Florida, illicitly, illegally, and it seems as though those eradication programs have been successful. I don't have records of hemp occurring naturally in Florida, and so anybody with the insight about that, it's another piece of the puzzle to put together. So great, thanks.
Lots of good questions coming in. We're gonna run out of time. So let's see. We've got Clara asked about anything about insect species that like hemp, and I guess I would expand that to, do we know anything about other ecological interactions with wildlife or other plants, like positive or negative?
Sure. So we've collected loads of invertebrates on hemp, both pests and predators, beneficials. I've avoided using a lot of chemicals in my fields, and so we get to see a lot of it. As far as big pests for hemp, top of the list right now is the fire ants and the boring larva, so like corn army worm and corn earworm, things like that, that'll get into the flowers. As far as sort of associations with other plants, it's a little bit too soon, sort of about crop rotations and things like that. But seeing a bunch of problems. There are also some controlled quarantinable pests specific to hemp, the hemp russet mite and the hemp aphid. If you find them, they're a big deal, and they stop your cultivation. Broad mites and other sorts of mites as well are sort of top the list of things to watch out for. Birds will eat the seed, move the seed. Deer will browse. So definitely the wildlife question is another layer to add on to this. I've been working with some folks at the National Wildlife Research Service to be following some of those birds as well. So, yeah.
Okay, maybe one of our last questions. Susan asked if, maybe you could expand this more broadly, but Susan asked if maybe citrus farmers who are losing the battle with citrus greening might look to switch to something like hemp. Would that be a viable option for farmers to change crops into this?
Right, citrus farmers, foresters in the north, tomato growers down here in Homestead. There are crops and commodities around the state where farmers are looking to find an outlet. There are definitely citrus farmers that have sort of retooled their fields in order to give hemp a try, and several other farmers as well. So that's exactly why people come talk to me. They say, I've got a crop that's not doing so well. Is hemp going to do better? I can't make any promises. And right now the evidence says it's a hard row to hoe. So,
okay. I do have one final question from myself. So I actually used to work for a short time at one of the research and education centers. And even there, we'd have problems with people coming on the property and taking produce and things like that. And right. I'm curious, and beyond even the research and education center, but maybe also including that, other farmers growing this crop, it seems like one that would draw in potential thefts, or I don't know, people. Right.
Well, you can see behind me here the barbed wire fence that we put down for that first planting. 2019, we were the first legal cultivation in the state in 60 years. So there was a lot of concern there. I think it just comes down to the education. I think there'll always be sort of bad actors. But in order to take a hemp crop and get high, you'd have to like smoke a telephone pole's worth. So you get a headache and diarrhea long before any fun out of it. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my way around that question. there was a question about propagation. Definitely, the clonal propagation, micro propagation is in the works as well, particularly for those flower crops. Is there a minimum size for the grower? No, but you need to be agriculture or industry or nursery designated in order to get a permit. Does it grow in South Florida? Again, I've shown here, this is South Florida, the picture of me here. Does it grow consistently? Does it grow viably to the economics? Those are remaining questions. So thanks, everybody.